Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Lots to talk about this morning on today's show. In the end, Liverpool, they couldn't say no. Coutinho, he finally moves to Barcelona for a staggering £146 million. The gloves, they're off. Conte calls it on and names the date when he'll sort it out with the special one. And he's spark out. Mark Hughes, he's sacked by Stoke after a humiliating defeat at Coventry in the FA Cup third round. Three heavyweights with us this morning. Shaun, Custis, he's head of sports at The Sun. Andy Dunn is the chief sports writer at The Mirror. Henry Winter, he's back. He's the chief football writer at The Times. I think you were still at The Telegraph when you last on him. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me back.
Can we just touch you?
Oh, no, it's nice to be
He's
back.
real.
Nice
it's
to be
him.
back.
He's
it's good
him.
to see you.
Alive and breathing. Welcome back to the show, Henry. Good to see you as ever. You can tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes. Let's have a look at some of the papers then. The figures, they keep going up and up and up for this man Coutinho on his way to Barcelona. He is there. He's already there. £142 million heist, according to the Sunday Times. £142 million in the Telegraph this morning. Sky's figures are 146. The Mail on Sunday, £145 million. Of course, he's on the back page of all the papers this morning. For good reason, £150 million on the back page of The Sun this morning. A few other stories around, though, and there are lots to talk about. Transfer story here, yet again. Jose eyeing a bid for Gareth Bale. We've seen that story once or twice. Will it really happen? Will it ever happen? We don't like to see these headlines, though. Cop Raystorm, this is relating to the Merseyside derby and Mason Holgate, the Everton defenders' allegations against Firmino, the FA investigating, looking into those claims. We're coming on to that a little bit later on, as we will with this story as well. Antonio Conte, let's get ready to rumble. This is The Mirror this morning. He's called it on with Jose Mourinho. He's named the date, February the 25th, when Chelsea play Manchester United. They're going to sort it out because he's called Mourinho a fake and a little man. This man, popular figure in football, but he's out of a job. We thought it was coming. It has happened. They lost against Coventry yesterday, and Mark Hughes, the Stoke manager, out of a job. We will talk about Sparky a little bit later on. But the big news, of course, Shaun, it's on all the back pages of the papers this morning, is Coutinho. Big money, this huge money. Is it money that Liverpool in the end could not resist?
Absolutely.
And did they have to allow a guy who's made it clear that he wanted to join Barcelona? Did they have to let him leave?
Yeah, I think so. It's a very good price for a very, very good player. They always go in the end. I mean, bar an administrative error with David De Gea, he would have gone as well. But if you look back over history, you know, Lineker, Hughes, McManaman, Bale, Beckham, Owen, Ronaldo, Suarez, now Coutinho, who knows, Kane, eventually. They tend to always go if Barcelona or Real Madrid come knocking. Clubs can resist for a little while, and Liverpool did well to resist that. And in the end, they got the money they wanted. And when your player makes it clear he wants to go, in the end, you've got to do the deal. It's a bit like what they did with what Fergie did with Ronaldo. Eventually, he understood. I think Liverpool have probably done a similar thing. I'm a little bit surprised he's gone at this time of year. Thought they may go to the end of the season, because even if you thought Liverpool had a slim chance of winning the Champions League, they've probably given that away now. They're not going to do it. Obviously, he's not going to play for Barcelona in this tournament, but they've given that chance up in the hope, I suppose, that in the future they'll be able to invest this money and invest it wisely. They've already spent £75 million on Van Dijk. They'll no doubt spend a lot more money. They're denying they're going for Mahrez, I think, at the moment, aren't they? Who you would think wouldn't be a bad fit. But is he? I mean, he's the second biggest transfer ever, but in the Premier League, I mean, he's probably not even the best player in his own team at Liverpool, was he? This season, Salah, you've got De Bruyne, you've got Kane, Hazard around the Premier League. They're probably better players than him. So he might get into your top 5 or 6 in the Premier League, but it's a good price for a very good player.
I think it's a loss of the Premier League, isn't it?
He is.
I mean, everyone's looking at it as, understandably, that this is a Liverpool story and a Barcelona story, but I think that the Premier League, you want talent like that there. I mean, when we go and watch him, whether he's playing at Anfield, and I quite admire him because his form hasn't really sort of tailed off, even though his head was clearly turned sort of last summer. But he's just a fantastic player to watch, whether the ball is dead and whether it's a free kick, whether he's sort of cutting in off the flank. I mean, he's a pretty unique player. So replacing him will be difficult. But, I mean, all those players that Shaun mentioned, you know, if you go back to sort of Liverpool in the 70s, I can remember when, as a kid, when Kevin Keegan went, and everyone was going, well, what's going to happen to Liverpool now? And then suddenly Kenny Dalglish came down from Celtic, and within 9 months was scoring the winning goal in the European Cup final. So clubs are resilient, particularly a club of Liverpool's stature, and they'll bring someone else in. They've got so much attacking talent. I think possibly the most significant signing they've made in a long time has been Van Dijk coming in, because that was clearly where they needed it. They've got so much attacking talent, but the defence, you could see the defence the other night against Everton was just lifted by him, having him there. So, but yeah, it's an absolute huge loss to the Premier League.
Andy, are you surprised at all by Coutinho's development? Signed for £8.5 million. In that kind of period when they signed Nuri Sahin, those types, a certain type and a certain profile of player. But that was £8.5 million, and what, 4 or 5 years later on, look at the kind of money they've sold him for.
5 years exactly. People forget he was actually signed in the mid-season transfer window. He was on loan, I think, at the time from Inter to Espanyol, and was highly thought of by certain individuals, not least of all Rafa Benitez, who was a great admirer of his at the time. So yeah, am I surprised at development? I think he's developed consistently. He's consistently got better and better and better. And, you know, we remember a time when he wasn't a particularly important player in the Brazilian national scene. He is now. And that's what Barcelona are buying. You know, I get what the lads are saying about the mitigating circumstances, but what everyone is doing today, you know, and Klopp has a very fulsome statement about him, is you are still sugarcoating a bitter pill. It's a bitter pill. Liverpool are losing their best player. Barcelona have come along, were resisted by FSG to start with, and they've got their way. This is a big club, basically looking at Liverpool as a smaller club and taking their best player from them. There's no getting away from that. You can sugarcoat it with they've got great money for them, who will they buy, you know, Liverpool will continue. The fact, and we all know the player, we've seen the pictures this morning, he couldn't look happier boarding that plane with his family to go and live in Barcelona, where he's obviously lived before. He clearly, you know, it's a dream come true. We get all that. But it is still a bitter pill for Liverpool to have to swallow, again losing one of their best players. They lost Luis Suarez to Barcelona. You know, they lost, I'm not saying Mascherano was anyway the same, but, you know, Alonso going to Real Madrid. Losing key players is still a bitter pill for a club like Liverpool to have to swallow. There's no getting away from it. And this has to be, you know, this has to be, and I agree with it, by the way, but this has to be Klopp's decision. I think that's the important thing. I suspect that FSG might have maintained their stance of standing up to Barcelona, standing up and saying, listen, you just can't come along here and unsettle our player, like you have done. You've unsettled him relentlessly over the past year, you know, with tactics that aren't particularly, I don't think, particularly pleasant. Now, I think FSG would have stood up. I think maybe Klopp's turned around and said, after conversations with the player, you know, who has done well since having the move turned down this summer, when he recovered from his bad back during that month, I think Klopp has probably turned around to him and realised how much he wants to go and decided to let him go. I think this is Klopp's decision, and I think it's one you can understand, but I think there's no getting away. It's a big blow for Liverpool. I think there will be a lot of stories now saying, well, it had to happen. It's a big blow for them.
You talk about Barcelona's tactics, but what about Liverpool's tactics with Van Dijk?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. I didn't excuse them,
no, but I mean, you know, everybody does it, don't they? Yeah. Let's not pretend there's a club somewhere who plays it by the book. None of them play it by the book. No, so you can't exonerate them.
Shaun, how do the fans feel about Coutinho? Let's go back to the summer transfer window when Coutinho he had the diplomatic injury, wasn't he? So he's missing for the first few weeks of the season. And then what happened? Lo and behold, what happens on January the 1st? Coutinho's got a slight injury that rules him out of the FA Cup tie on Friday night. How do they square that with the supporters, these diplomatic injuries? And it's not just Coutinho.
No, but I think supporters aren't daft. They understand what goes on. They understood that Coutinho was probably go. And as Henry said, they're probably quite grateful for the fact his standards didn't drop. And to a large extent, with Sanchez at Arsenal, I know he's been up and down, but he still does put in some very good performances as well. So I think Coutinho was quite sensible. He knew, keep his standards up. But look, if you've got a big move like that coming up, you're not going to play in that FA Cup game on Friday night. You're just not. You knew it was on the way. It was going to happen. Everybody, and I think even Liverpool directors and that would go, hang on a sec, there's just no way. I took the point earlier in the season, we were talking about that the Premier League had been robbed of seeing Coutinho for the first month, and I think that's very true. But again, we know how close that was. It was clearly quite close.
There were a lot of players in the summer that we were deprived of watching.
But isn't that just life? It's just how it is, and we have to understand that that is football now. I'm afraid it's the practicalities of the game. It just is what it is.
But just on Donny's point, criticising Liverpool, I mean, there is a fairly established pecking order in European football. And the two Spanish clubs are clearly at the top in terms of lifestyle, in terms of wages, in terms of an opportunity at Barcelona to play alongside one of the greatest players of all time in Messi. Ditto at Real Madrid, if you've got an opportunity, which Bale clearly seized, as well as the lifestyle and the money of playing with an individual like Ronaldo. You can completely see. I mean, when Coutinho was growing up, would he have been growing up thinking about playing for Liverpool or playing for Barcelona or Real Madrid? I'm sure it was the
latter time, Henry, when they would have grown up.
Absolutely, but we're not in that. You know, we have the superstar coaches in this country now. We don't necessarily have all the superstar players. We've got some. We've got Hazard and Kane and individuals like that. But not, you know, they are going to move.
Hasn't it always been Barcelona and Real Madrid? Hang on, hasn't it always been Barcelona and Real Madrid? It's always been the way that if they come calling, by and large, you go there. And when we're arguing that Man United's the biggest club in the world, well, commercially, possibly it fights there. But the truth of the matter is that it's Real Madrid and Barcelona.
I agree, so you can't criticise Liverpool. That is a natural move for him to make.
Henry, I wasn't criticising Liverpool. In no way was I criticising Liverpool. I was just saying it's not palatable, it's not particularly palatable for Liverpool fans to have to take when their best players are being taken away from them.
Donny, was there anything Liverpool could have done to keep him?
Yes.
Just say
Obviously,
no.
just say no. I mean, just say no. I'm not saying they should, and I don't think they should.
Was that realistic?
No, not overly realistic, but it's still possible. Certainly for the rest of the season, it's possible. I mean, they said no in the summer. So what changes between then and January? Maybe they're thinking they might not get that money for him in the summer. Something could happen, and they can't get that money, and he still wants to go. Maybe that's the situation.
Maybe they're not
Klopp
going to win the
enough.
league. Which they might have thought they had a chance of winning the league at the start of the season.
But they may
now
win the
know
Champions League.
No, but yes, I agree. I agree with that. But they do know they're not going to win the league, so that's taking one of the things out of it. But as I said earlier on, they have blown the chance.
I'm not saying
they should.
this idea. Of course, they could have just said no. They could have said no. Wait till the end of the season. They can. As far as I understand, as far as we all understand, there is no get-out clause in his contract. Certainly not one that gets him out right now. So they could have said no. As I say, that's why I think this has to be Klopp's decision. Klopp is actually, and by Klopp's very long statements in which he pays tribute to Coutinho, says he did all he could to keep him. I think it's Klopp who's come to the conclusion, hang on a minute, you know, he won't be the same player. You know, people think he's been the same player this first half of the season, but deep down, he won't for this second half. He wants this move. It's there now. And, you know, emotionally as well. As man to man, he's thinking, well, this is a guy who wants his family there. Clearly, that's part of Klopp's statement where he says, this is a guy who wants to go and live there with his family, his young family. So I understand all that, but cutting to the chase, they could have just kept him.
But do you remember a year before Suarez left, Steven Gerrard, and he spoke quite sort of publicly about this, is that he had spoken to Suarez and said, don't think about an Arsenal, you're good enough to go, in, you know, give us another year and you're good enough to go in a year's time, to a club of Barcelona's stature. So you can understand the frustration there, but also, as Shaun says, you know, fans are not stupid.
Oh, they're not stupid.
They will understand how
absolutely.
Huge this is for him.
Yeah, they'll understand it, and also they'll see that they'll now want the money to be spent. I think, you know, you look at what happened post Suarez, how the money was spent. That's going to be key now. You know, it wasn't spent particularly wisely. You look at all the buys Liverpool have made since Suarez, or sort of just around the time they were selling him. And, you know, there's as many misses as there are hits. There's a Markovic for a Firmino. You know, there's a Benteke, you know, for a Nathaniel Klein, or whoever's been a success.
But he's not getting hammered by the Liverpool fans for going. There's not rioting on the streets about the transfer, if you like. There's not... It's understood this was going to happen. The thing is now, as you say, what are you going to do with it? You spent all that on Van Dijk, which... presumably is a very good acquisition. Yeah. Now what? This is the key.
But is there
Klopp's clearly got it in mind what he's going to do.
Is there also an element of just again, you know, bearing in mind that he wanted to go, but you know, Klopp, to me, seems to have a very exciting project going on at Anfield, playing very exciting football, very exciting attacking project. There must just be an element of, I don't know, in the game itself, of sadness that Coutinho didn't want to be part of that at probably its most exciting time. maybe, that he just didn't want to see how it went for the rest of the season in the Champions League.
But they're too far off. The Champions League's a bit of a one-off, isn't it? You might get it, you might not. The league, you're so far off. He's not thinking, well, next year we'll be challenging for the league. It just doesn't look like
Shaun,
that.
you mentioned Van Dijk. Do we accept that they're connected? That the transfer is connected, that they've used the money. They know the money's coming in for Coutinho, so they've paid the premium for Van Dijk to make sure they get it.
I think people thought that immediately he signed on, and they couldn't get him for a bit cheaper earlier on when they were trying their particular tactics to get him out of there. And eventually they got what they wanted. Yes, I think they knew. I think they knew it was on. Klopp's been hinting at it for a couple of weeks now. He's, as people have said who were there listening to him, he did change his stance. It wasn't he's not for sale. It was, I'm not sure what's going to happen, lads.
Yeah, and then it puts the price into perspective, doesn't it? Whichever price you believe, you know...
Well, it's 142, 145...
To be fair, it's about add-ons, that, though, isn't it? The big cash down payment's 105, 108, 110, whatever. But it's how the add-ons work out that gets you to either 145 or 150. That's
twice the fee of Van Dijk's doesn't look bad to me.
Yeah. Certainly is. It's big money. £145 million. There's a picture on the front page of the Mail, their sports section this morning, of Coutinho last night boarding a private jet to move for his big move to Barcelona. OK, next up, we're going to talk about Conte and Mourinho. Conte's named the date. It's February the 25th. That's when he calls it on with Jose Mourinho. We'll talk about that next. Right, you three got your stories straight? Let's get ready to rumble. That's the front page of the Mirror Sports section this morning. That's Mourinho and Conte. Conte sort of had the last word, Dunny, because that was last night after the FA Cup tie between Chelsea and Norwich up at Carrow Road. Let's first get into Mourinho's initial comments that Mourinho no longer behaves like a clown on the touchline, that this is the mature Mourinho, this is a different Mourinho, and the elevated, lofty Mourinho. Was he referring to Antonio Conte, even though he didn't name him?
I'll tell you what, it's probably a sad indictment of the way I look at a lot of managers now, and thought he could be referring to about 4 or 5, couldn't he? You did. You actually thought, when he said it, I picked it up and I thought to myself, well, is it Conte? You know, is it Klopp? Is it Pep?
I thought Pep. Yeah.
I thought Pep. You know, when you think about the things, the Nathan Redmond incident, I'm actually thinking he's being pretty generic, or giving him the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe he is being a little bit self-deprecating, referring to himself. I quickly ruled that one out, obviously. But so I thought, yes, it could be any of those. So I actually didn't think it was specifically Conte. It's obviously then been brought up in Conte's presence and intimated that it could have been referring to him. And he's obviously had to go back. And whatever the ins and outs of the chronology of it and who's right, who's wrong, it just shows that there is a deep-seated, enmity between the two, doesn't it? I mean, it's as simple as that. We've always known it, and this is just manifestation of it.
It has escalated pretty quickly, Henry.
So why as an industry do we fall for it? Because it's pretty clear what's going on. You've got two managers who I'm sure it's fantastic as a sports editor. You've got these few,
and as a sports and as a footballer.
But as an industry, we love it when we can focus on personalities. It's the celebrity culture. I understand that, but actually, why are we letting them get away from the fact that they are talking about things like this, and we're asking them questions about this, when actually the real questions are what's going on the pitch. The fact is, you've got two fantastic managers whose teams are underperforming, and that is why this whole thing seems to me a complete, distraction from the performances. Conte yesterday, he went in and did 4 interviews, and he basically said to broadcast television, radio, and then print at Carrow Road, and basically said exactly the same thing. And he was wanting to get his message across. I'm sure he was irritated by the barbs that were coming from Mourinho, but also it's because it deflects on the fact that his team had performed badly. Ditto with Mourinho. I know they've picked up a little bit of late, but it's not been necessarily the greatest season for him. And yet we fall for it. We are falling for their mind games. The fact that we are not focusing on issues on the pitch. We're just sort of enjoying this sort of slightly fabricated Punch and Judy show that's going on.
But it is good fun.
I'm not
We've got
disputing
Manchester
that,
City
but also
romping away with the league, which is
football.
very entertaining by Manchester City, but actually means they're romping away from it. And now these two have kicked off spectacularly, and you want the League Managers Association to intervene, to mediate and calm them both down. What for? Let them get on with it.
The only thing I would say, Henry, the only thing I would say is okay, we do want we do want colourful press conferences, of course we do. That's what we write about these managers every day, and they're high-profile, huge personalities.
Yeah.
But what about some of the language and the colourful language that they've both used?
I take that.
Okay, clown. Okay,
Yeah.
that's within acceptable boundaries, I would venture. Conte saying on Friday, senile dementia.
Yes,
He's
I agree.
He's used that phrase, which
that,
Chelsea very, very, very quickly tried to change to amnesia.
Agreed.
Coutinho was in there. I mean, Matt Law wrote a very interesting piece in the Telegraph yesterday morning, in which he went through that press conference and actually said, Carlo Coutinho, obviously his English is better than Conte's. He's always in those press conferences and he's listening, and occasionally Conte turns to him and basically for some clarification, am I using the words right? And apparently, according to Matt's piece in the Telegraph yesterday, he did that, and Coutinho said he meant amnesia. I mean, which I hope he did mean, because you would not. I agree with your initial premise. You can't be throwing away around words like that, descriptions like that. A little bit like Wenger with suicide.
Agreed with that. But do we really want League Managers Association getting people together every time there's an argument, saying, "Can you please calm down, lads? Don't have an argument." Arguments. Spats between managers are part of football. Spats between players are part of football. I agree when they cross the line, you've got concerns. But let's say he really did mean amnesia, which is still not great, I agree. But do we really want to get involved and stop them when this could be one of the great, sort of battles between two managers? Look, me and you have spats on here. Have had, well, in the old days when you used to be on.
Out away from it.
When you used to be on. If somebody said, we're going to get the chairman of the Football Writers Association to ring up and mediate between Henry and Shaun, you tell them where to go. You wouldn't have that, would you?
But you love this because you're a sports editor and you love these headlines.
Writer. You're saying you don't like it as
so I'm a football writer.
writer.
I want to focus on the football. And actually, we're not focusing on the problems on the pitch, which is there are issues at Chelsea yesterday. How much discussion has actually been on Bakayoko, on Batshuayi?
That's not as interesting, I'm afraid. Andy's a chief sports writer, a colour writer. You would rather have that than focusing on Bakayoko's position in central midfield.
A combination of both.
Oh, come on. That would run as your headline.
Of course, but then we're sort of talking at cross purposes. Do we, as an industry, want this to stop?
Have you really drifted away this much from being a football fan that you would rather focus on punch and Judy?
Did you love Wenger versus Ferguson? Did you enjoy that? Did you like the way they used to bait each other? Did you enjoy it? You remember it fondly, the great battles between
I remember
Wenger.
fondly those two great teams of that era.
Yes, they agreed.
Okay,
so
the 90 minutes.
But I also remember the spats they had, and they were great. And some of it was quite humorous as well.
Sorry, I know you're going to make your point. No, but sorry, when you grew up watching football in the North East, were you focusing on what managers were saying, or were you focusing on what, I don't know how old you are, whether you're focusing on Supermac, were you focusing on Beardsley, were you focusing on Gascoigne? You grew up watching the football. We fell in love with the game. And I hope most of us are still in love with the game because of the quality of the football. And that's why it's great you started off this programme talking about Coutinho. It has to be about the quality of the football, not about what happens in the press conference.
When anything's written about Brian Clough, you talk about his great teams, but you also talk about the battle with Revie. They go together. That is fondly remembered, the battle with Revie. Clough and Revie on television, sat next to each other, for goodness sake, having a battle. It's one of the great pieces of television of all time.
So were two European Cup finals.
Yes, but it goes hand in hand. That's remembered. You laugh about it now. It's remembered with fond affection.
No,
I'm laughing
the fact that you've drifted away so much from actually being in love with the game.
Oh, come on. You're doing it again. You're back and you're doing it again because you're trying to put words into my mouth. I'm not doing that. That is entertaining. This spat is still entertaining and interesting and will provide column inches, and you, reluctant as you may be, will have to write about it.
I would rather have the entertainment on the pitch. Sorry, Donny.
The point is,
you're still here, Donny.
I'm sorry, Donny. I knew I should have brought a book. But going back, we're at slightly cross purposes. Of course, as an industry, we're OK with it. But that doesn't preclude the idea that the LMA should get involved. That doesn't...
You think they should?
No, I don't particularly think they should. Well, do I think they should? I'm not sure. Should the clubs
do you?
No. But just think about it.
Should the FA get...
Should the clubs get involved? Should the clubs get involved? OK, listen, let's, from the standpoint is that, as an industry, we like it. And also, I would say, the Times are as likely to lead on it as the Mirror is, as the Sun is.
They are now. Would they have done 20 years ago?
No, they would let on cricket.
It'd be rugby.
But I'll tell you what.
Imagine Henry 6 pars down the side.
I can't. It's unimaginable. So imagine if you know, the Times columnists, for example, will write as many columns on the psyche of Jose Mourinho. They do it regularly in the pages of the Times, as it will do. Yeah. So that's fine.
That's columnists as opposed to the actual individual football.
So the industry are okay with it. Now, should the football clubs or the LMA be concerned? Then maybe they should, because the one thing I would say is that it's very entertaining, this individual animosity between Mourinho and Conte, between Mourinho and Guardiola, between Mourinho and whoever, and whoever, and whoever. However, they probably shouldn't lose sight of the fact that they are representing their football clubs. You know, this is Manchester United Jose Mourinho is representing. This is Chelsea Antonio Conte is representing. Does it reflect well on the club, on their employer, when they're using, you know, language like we've just discussed? Is that and in that instance, do I want it to stop? No, it's great for the newspapers. Do I think that the club should actually, maybe the chief executive, those higher up, say, hang on a minute, guys, rein it in.
This is not becoming...
This is not becoming of our football club. And when Henry says it's distracting, it is distracting. And maybe it's distracting for the players as well.
It's really distracting because they want to...
But I don't agree with that. I don't think there is... I don't think anything... I think we have this preconception that Mourinho will come out with these things to detract from maybe a mediocre
He said
time
in the past.
for football.
He said in the past that match often starts in the press conference.
How many times have you been with him now, and you just say something that it's a trigger, and then he's gone? You haven't even actually maybe thought, you know.
But how many times have we also heard managers saying it'd be quite nice to talk about the football?
The reason this has escalated, though, is that Mourinho, in the second press conference, was actually digging out the press, and at that point saying, you know, you made it about Conte, but actually it wasn't about, you know, being a clown on the pitch. However, so he said he saw Conte's point, and we're all going a bit, well, maybe he is digging out the press, maybe the press was a bit wrong. So he's got the moral high ground. It could have been drawn a line under there. Then he goes and talks about match fixing. That's what he then says, implying something about the Chelsea manager. So that's why it escalates again. He didn't need to do that. If he'd stopped at the end of the previous sentence, this would have been put to bed, but he didn't.
Yeah. Conte eventually, of course, exonerated by the Italian courts, but not by the Italian FA, sure. But how does this affect... Will Mourinho's conduct over the last few days, how does that affect his standing and his relationship, what was left of it, with Chelsea supporters?
I think... Look, there will always be...
Is it now damaged beyond repair?
I don't think it will have changed hugely, because there were a strong section of Chelsea supporters who had moved away from Mourinho, I think. But there will always be a group, there will always be 20-25% of them who will respect Jose, thank him, believe he did a great job for their club. They will always. I think the three quarters have gone away, and I think there's a quarter who stick loyally to him, and I don't think that's going to change. I don't think this bit changes it.
Don't you? I don't understand, guys, why Mourinho can't just say, look, I had two separate spells at Chelsea. I had a magnificent period. I won titles in both eras, and leave it at that.
Well, I think he
and if he left it at that, they'd still worship the ground he walks on.
He almost did when he was last there, when he was holding up the three fingers to show the titles that he'd won there. I would love it if he actually came into his press conference and started talking about how well Jesse Lingard was playing. Or, you know, we sort of got into that. Again, coming back to this issue that we should be focusing on the football as well as the press conferences.
We need to bring a tactics board for Henry the next time he's on.
We do.
Don't leave it 15 months.
I absolutely take your point. I absolutely take your point, because I think Lingard has developed as a player, and I think
he's not getting mentioned in the papers.
And I think Mourinho does deserve quite a lot of credit for that, for giving him wings and letting him play. But you cannot deny it is not as good a headline. Yes. Lingard's playing very well, Sir Jose, as that. It's just a fact. Whether you love writing about it or not, and we all love that, it's not as interesting as that.
Did you get into football writing to write about press conferences or to write about Malcolm McDonald?
All aspects of the game, everything that happens, all nuances.
Just quickly on Jose, you mentioned there, you made a good point there, Ash, about why can't he just let it lie. The reason why Mourinho, I don't think, can let anything lie is that even with his incredible record, 25 trophies, even with that, he thinks he's underappreciated, undervalued, and basically we don't acknowledge how great a manager he's been.
But do we have to write about it every single day?
No, not just us.
Do we have to say he's won 3 titles?
Not just us, but his peers. And I think that's reflected in the way he has a go at his peers. I think he believes, and in Conte's comments about him are incredibly disparaging this morning. You know, a little man. Some of it might come down to a simple thing as that he wasn't a player. You know, that I think will always be a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He wasn't a player. And I always think he's got this on his shoulder that he feels that, you know, how many times has he said he's not bothered the fact that he's only ever won 3 Manager of the Month awards. Of course he's bothered. You know, has he ever been LMA Manager of the Year? No, he hasn't. David Moyes has been LMA Manager of the Year 3 times. You know, and that's nothing against David Moyes, you know, all respect to him. But Mourinho, I think, always feels that he has never been properly acknowledged by his peers for what he's done in management. And I think that reflects in the way he's all too ready to aim barbs at other managers. And listen, you know, Conte's not the first and he's not the last. Guardiola's been in the firing line, in the crosshairs. Rafa Benitez has.
Wenger.
Manuel Pellegrini has. Arsene Wenger has. A couple of managers in Portugal in his early days got it as well. And I just think that is
Ranieri in Italy.
Yes, Ranieri, which of course Conte referenced yesterday. So I think that's all about a character who thinks that he has never got. He thinks he's a special one, and he thinks he has never got the credit he deserves for what he's done. And I think we've seen that from the very moment he came to England.
Do you think he has, though? Do you think I mean, he's been showered with praise and love for his...
Well, has he though? Do you remember the early days? Do you remember when, I think in the second season at Chelsea, you know, when he called them...
When they won the title?
When they'd won that, but he would
what
call...
What more do you want us to do?
But he'd have an informal... I remember having an informal sort of lunch with writers, and basically the point of it was...
Yeah.
You know, everyone's wondering why we're here, like, you know, off-the-record lunch, you know, and he's great, you know, whatever. And
off-the-record lunch, which is now becoming on the record.
Yeah, but on the record, I think a dozen years later it can become on the record, can't it? But basically the point of it was, the underlying point of it was that he wanted to know, essentially, he didn't say it in as many words, but it was clear he wanted to know why he perceived that we, the press, still reserved all our special glowing praise for Arsene Wenger and not for him.
Yeah.
When he was winning trophies and Wenger was not winning trophies.
The same. He did
because
exactly the same.
In 2006, Arsenal got to the Champions League final, the same season that Chelsea won their second successive title.
But true. But the overarching point was that we would say to him is because we like watching Arsenal play football in the way they play, and even though you're playing winning football, I think that was the point. And he's made it ever since, hasn't he? He's made it ever since that his football not derided is the wrong word, sort of pigeonholed as being slightly functional, bothers him. It bothers him that you know...
He did the same sort of off-the-record thing in America in 2007 when we were on the tour.
I love these kind of off-the-record lunches.
He did another one where he explained how much he loved being at Chelsea and he enjoyed it, but, you know, why do you treat these characters this way? What is it about? And he was actually listening to certain things. 4 months
this
later,
in the Beverly Hills Hotel?
It was, yeah.
Because he loves that. We all love the Beverly Hills Hotel.
I wonder why.
Was Jennifer Aniston there? I see. Anyway, he did all that, and then 4 months later, he'd got the sack. But he was actually talking about how much he enjoyed it. But he'd had a bit of a kicking from his own board that season because had they won the FA Cup and the League Cup, but he was still getting a kicking because he hadn't won the league and he hadn't won the Champions League, and he was thinking, I'm doing great stuff, what is the problem? But I would say in those days I think we gave him more benefit of the doubt because he had a lighter hearted side to him. He had more humour, there was charm, the Swan in Scotland, all of this sort of stuff, and he was funny, wasn't he? And he could give it back a bit and have a bit of a laugh with you. Now he doesn't seem to do that. He just seems to be bitter all the time, really.
Well, I think also, I mean, the media obviously was very sort of supportive, and I do think that I take your point, but I think there was, if you look back on the sort of headlines there were a lot of glowing. There's a lot of glowing praise towards, and I just think that certainly in the last 2 years, I think people have just got a little bit bored with all his very, very obvious stunts, picking fights with individuals, whether it's medical staff, whether it's referees, whether it's managers, whether it's the media, and people are just sort of rolling their eyes at it and saying, well, why are you trying to deflect for issues on the pitch? And look, the truth is always on the pitch. And if the players aren't performing, Mourinho will come into a press conference and throw hand grenades around.
He will. You'll be able
to read for it.
You'll be able to read Henry's match reports in the Times on February the 26th. You'll be able to read the headlines in all the other papers the next day. OK, more headlines about Mark Hughes in the papers today. He's lost his job as the Stoke manager after that humiliating defeat against Coventry yesterday in the FA Cup. More on him next. Welcome back. With us this morning, Shaun, Custis, Andy Dunn and Henry Winter. Henry just wants to talk about the tactics and the football this morning. I'm afraid we've got one or two other subjects, if you don't mind. One of them we've already talked about, £142 million heist. This is Coutinho on his way to Barcelona, expected to be confirmed today. The Mail have got a picture of him boarding a private jet last night to sign for £145 million. Headlines we do not like to see, a very disturbing cop, a race storm. This is Mason Holgate's allegations against Firmino, the Liverpool forward, during the Merseyside derby on Friday night. Liverpool won that game, of course, in the FA Cup. The FA investigating it. The fee goes up and up and up in the summer. £150 million for Coutinho. Cop out, £145 million. Their new signing as well, Michael Owen on the back page. We'll hear from him next week. When we'll hear from this man, Sparky. Lost his job last night as a Stoke City manager. Lost against Coventry in the FA Cup third round. Henry, was it coming to this?
I think so. I mean, reflecting on what we were saying before, I mean, the events on the pitch cost him. I mean, he was a fabulous player. He's always been a joy to deal with from a media perspective. I mean, we went and talked to him recently and just sort of talking about how he tried to evolve Stoke City, bringing more sort of creative players in. But then obviously he lost Arnautovic. And I think as well as looking at a new manager, and he looked a bit tired, the players weren't necessarily responding. There didn't seem so much life in the dugout or on the pitch. So I think it was inevitable. And look, you've also got to give huge credit to Coventry City and what Mark Robbins has done there. I mean, it's brilliant, and they absolutely deserve that yesterday, and particularly the fans deserve that, given what they've gone through with the sort of the wretched hedge fund CISA who are sort of involved there. So I think it's inevitable, but they've got to address the squad. You know, there is. I mean, some of the players he's brought in, Saido Berahino hasn't been scoring. He hasn't sort of responded. So there are issues in the squad as well as in the dugout.
Did he lose credibility, Dunny, when he made all those changes for the defeat at Chelsea? He made it pretty clear, look, I'm doing this for a reason. I'm writing off this game. He didn't say I'm chucking it away.
No.
But he did say, look, it's all about the Newcastle game. We've got to beat Newcastle. And when you do that, and when you say that, you then have to win, don't you?
Yeah.
And they didn't. They lost.
And they lost, and you're a hostage to that fortune. You know, what you would say is that he was missing several key defenders for that Chelsea game anyway. You would also say that the chances...
But Donny, they were defenders.
Yes,
they could have... had it been the FA Cup final,
I understand.
They would have played.
I understand. When you're not playing Joe Allen, you're not playing Shaqiri, it's clear then what you're doing, and it was clear that game was... listen, he won't be the first or he won't be the last. I don't particularly think that was the decisive factor. The factor has been, from what started last season, is a run of form and maybe a run of the way that they're actually just not playing very well. The commitment isn't as obvious as you would normally see from a Stoke City team. Their stats in terms of running, in terms of application, are down. It's a combination of all those things that brought it to an end. I think it's quite a sad ending, really. I thought the Hughes and Stoke were a good match, and I think it also brings up the question of, listen, we're not Stoke fans, so Stoke fans have, and I know a lot of Stoke fans, and what they've seen and what they tell me they've seen over the last 12 months. I understand why they wanted a change. I understand that, but it does bring up the philosophical question: is how much does a body of work count? How much credit do you have in the bank from 3 ninth place finishes? How much credit do you have in the bank from changing a style of play into something that was becoming unwatchable to something that's very watchable? How much credit do you have in the bank from signings that have been successes? There have been successful signings, Shaqiri being one of them. There have been very bad signings, and that's what's cost them in the end. Berahino, I think, is a signing that will get any manager the sack. It was the most bizarre, to me, one of the most bizarre signings I've seen. They bid up to whatever price it was. Was it 13 million in the end?
15, did it?
I think it was below that. But basically, they were bidding against each other in a one-horse race. No one else wanted him. No one else wanted the player. That was clear. It was one of the strangest signings, and then, of course, he came with the baggage that they didn't know about or claimed they didn't know about. To me, that was when I thought, hang on a minute, what is Stoke's policy here? What is their transfer policy? What part of the band is the director of football, Mark Cartwright, playing in all this? We haven't heard his name. Many people wouldn't know who he was. Who takes the responsibility for the signing of Kevin Wimmer, who's been a disaster, for Mbula, but then also, for the good signings. So I think there's more to it. But my philosophical argument is that they looked a good match. Me and Henry spent some time with him a couple of months ago, wasn't it? And we were asking about, his ambitions, and his ambitions were at Stoke because he basically, essentially given up on the idea. We said to him, if a big job comes up, do you think you'd be on a shortlist? He said, I wouldn't be on a shortlist if there was 20 names on the shortlist for one of the bigger jobs. And it was almost as though his ambitions had now been at Stoke. You might get a new manager at Stoke. They might take a punt on a Gary Rowett or say a Lee Johnson. And if they take the job and get Stoke progressing, they will then maybe move on. With Hughes, I just thought that he found a good manager. They were a good match for a long time. And I just think it's pretty sad that it's come to this end.
Would people look at Mark Hughes and think you had your chance, you had your shot at it when you were the Manchester City manager?
I think he thinks that. I do. I think he... maybe this thing at Stoke, maybe he thought that he'd hit the glass ceiling at Stoke. And maybe that was reflected in a lacklustre 12 months. Maybe, that maybe underlying in the early days at Stoke, when he had them in ninth and playing some decent stuff, maybe he still had this thought, well, maybe I could get a Big Six job, or maybe I could get... Maybe that disappeared, and maybe with that came a little bit of complacency. He didn't maybe have the drive. He's a complicated character, But when I say complicated, he was saying to us, wasn't it at that time, that he's one of these managers who can... You think of Pep Guardiola, there's a famous story that he can't go... Is it 32 minutes without thinking or talking about football? That's any time in the summer. But Hughes was saying that he goes home, he shuts the door. He shuts the door in the game, and he doesn't think about it then, he doesn't let it bother him. The intensity you see in the technical area isn't there away from the pitch. We all know he's quite shy. He's quite sort of quietly spoken, quite reticent.
Quite funny. He's got a good sense
of humour. Yes, he has. I just thought. I just think I understand why he's gone. I think it's quite sad because I think they were a good match for such a long time.
Shaun, I don't want to get too sentimental, but I do look at Mark Hughes and I always think of him as the guy who got the volley for Wales, the guy who scores in the Cup Winners' Cup final in '91, the guy who scores against Oldham in the FA Cup semi-final in 1990. How difficult do you think it is for someone with his status in the game and standing, as a player and someone that we remember as undoubtedly a great player in this country, and then they become a manager and perhaps our feelings towards them are a little bit different?
Look, it's difficult, but he's been a manager for a long time. It's not like it's not been like a litany of failure. He's had successes as well. I think after Man City, I think people felt, well, new owners come in, that's the way it is, go to another club, see what happens. And then you had QPR. And that really, I think, damaged him.
He shouldn't have gone there, should he?
I think I think he went there thinking he'd get a lot of money to spend. It'll be a very good, big project, a chance to... And he spent it, and it didn't work out. And I think that damaged him quite a lot. I think you can see the pressures getting to him. I was really surprised the way he reacted to Arnautovic when Arnautovic came off. To turn and point at him and almost join in with the fans and have a go at a player who did do some good things. All right, at the end, maybe he wasn't playing so well for Stoke. But, to lose it like that, I also think... he was a very strong character on the pitch. Shy off it maybe, strong character on the pitch. And at Man City at times, I thought he didn't display that strong character in the sense that people like Robinho were allowed to get away with things. You see that players had to wear, shirt and tie. I'm trying to remember, I think it was shirt and tie. And Robinho would turn up with a cap round here and his shirt hanging out. And almost...
Cantona famously did that at Manchester United, Shaun. It didn't do bad for him. It didn't work out too badly,
He seemed, to me, to allow certain players to behave in certain ways and deal with other ones differently. Look, I may have it a bit wrong, but it looked like that on the surface. And maybe he's not as strong as you think as a manager. And you talk about his shyness. Maybe that's a bit how he is as a manager. But I have to say, when you talk to him, like when we do press conferences, and if some of the lads have off-the-record conversations, he's witty, he's very interesting about football and all the characters in the game. He's really steeped in it. I'd love him, actually, to get another job. He is a good character, and I think he does have successes, and he could go into another club and do well again. But it's hard to see where he'd get another Premier League job now.
He needs a break, doesn't he? I think he probably needs a little bit of time out of the game before he comes back. Guys, we need to move on. If it's OK with you, Henry, we're going to get the ball out. We're going to talk Ross Barkley. Get his move from Everton.
Shaun, your big moment.
Everton to Chelsea, £15 million. Does he need to revive his career? Does he need to resurrect his career? Or was it never in doubt?
Well, I don't think he's ever been
his talent.
His talent's never been in doubt. I mean, some of the goals he scored against Newcastle when he dribbled from his own half. But the problem with Ross Barkley's career at the moment looks fantastic in highlights. But what he needs is a consistent run, just delivering game after game. Obviously, he's been unfortunate with injuries. But there's a fantastic talent there, and there is a talent which we don't have that much of in this country from an English perspective, and also if you look through the Premier League. I think that ability to pick the ball up in midfield, and I mean everyone's making the comparisons with Gaza, and I mean Ross is quite an interesting individual. I mean, he goes away and he studies the videos. He studied particularly Gascoigne's great game against Holland at Euro '96, when Gascoigne wasn't simply just taking on Dutch players. He was tracking back. He was winning the ball, and he was running the game. And I think so. Ross wanted to sort of add that element, particularly the sort of defensive side, to his game as well. So, there's a kid there. And we say it's a kid. He's 24. Mm-hmm. I mean, how old was Götze when he was scoring the goal in the World Cup final? So 22, 23, something like that. So he needs to deliver now. And I think he's got that opportunity, whether he's a Conte signing or whether it's a Chelsea signing. The way Chelsea are, you sign for the club because the managers tend to move on. I just think there is an opportunity for him in central midfield. Bakayoko hasn't really trained on. I just hope he does well, because he's a player that England could take to the World Cup. That ability to drag the ball through the middle. Wilshere can do it a little bit, but I think Wilshere we're seeing he's more of a sort of passer now. So I hope. I mean, he's such a nice guy as well. So I wish him all the best.
You've seen a lot of Barkley in his development as an Everton player. Did he need to make this move?
No, I don't see how he needed to make a move. I don't see that he's going to get particularly more game time at Chelsea than he will at Everton. I don't particularly know how much game time he'll get at Chelsea. It's a good move for him, good move financially. He'll play in the Champions League, or at least he'll get the odd start in the Champions League. I look at that Chelsea team and I don't think he'll be a fixture.
You don't think he gets in?
I don't think he gets in.
Fully fit.
Where does he get in?
I don't think he gets in at the moment. No. Well, and when you say you've seen his development, I have. And do I think he's developed as I would expect a player of that nature to develop? Well, no. Now, injuries have had, quite a bit to do with this. From the very first, when he was a teenager, that horrific, I think it was a double leg fracture, wasn't it? So it takes a lot of coming back from. So he's shown a lot of resilience to come back from injuries. But do I think he's developed as a player? No, I don't particularly think he's developed that well. I've seen him. I mean, one of his last games I saw him for Everton against Liverpool at Anfield, and basically he looked as though he might be able to do something. But in terms of discipline on the pitch, in terms of where he should be or fitting into a system, we've never seen that. And you speak to his coaches, that's why did Koeman dig him out so often? Why did he feel the need to do that? Other coaches, have sort of off the record have expressed strictly off the record. I've expressed a. No.
It's a good advert for football journalism. This show, isn't it?
We can't say anything.
Have an off the record conversation. Yeah.
So, but no. Other coaches have suggested that he wouldn't be the first player, certainly not the last young player to sometimes, go rogue in a game, basically not comply with instructions tactically let's say tactically indisciplined. And I think that has been the case. I think he's got a lot to learn. Listen, the move might do him good. I don't particularly see. I would have liked to have seen Ross Barkley develop at Everton and become the leader at Everton that many thought that he should have been. Many thought that he was set out to be. Many thought he was earmarked to be.
I think because of his personality, I think he might have been a better fit at Tottenham Hotspur under Pochettino, who will put the arm around the shoulder, which is what Ross needs, and why he responded to Martinez more than Koeman.
Yeah, sure. OK, big challenge ahead then for Ross Barkley now that he is a Chelsea player. OK, next up, we're going to talk about Mason Holgate and his allegations against Firmino during the Merseyside derby on Friday night. More on that next. OK, let's talk about events in the Merseyside derby on Friday night, Shaun. Liverpool won that fixture in the FA Cup third round, but, of course, it has been overshadowed by the allegations Mason Holgate made on the pitch against Firmino after they collided and Holgate shoved Firmino into the stands. How did the FA... We saw Holgate's reaction, and we saw that Firmino had clearly said something to Holgate that affected his mental state at the time. But how did the FA investigate something that it seems the other players and probably the referee and the officials didn't hear.
Well, you interview everybody who was around, ref, players, everybody who's on that pitch, and be as thorough as you possibly can. It might be very difficult to get to the end of it, but you need to do it properly, because clearly Holgate was upset by something. That said, I mean, if you just go back to the original incident, what he was doing, shoving Firmino over those buttons, I had somebody say that was a yellow card offence. No, it wasn't. It was a red card offence.
Straight red,
he could have been seriously, seriously injured. So, first of all, I understand why Firmino was angry. Let's put it that way. What went on after that? Proper investigation. Now, the FA, to me, is quite inconsistent with how they deal with things. I don't think they dealt with, say, Ferdinand issue with Terry very well. That went on and on and on and on.
Okay.
Suarez, what was that, 8-game ban? Dealt with quite quickly. I'm not sure they have procedures properly in place to know exactly how to deal with it. They'll write to the clubs, they'll talk to the players, but they need a thorough investigation into it.
Is there a correct procedure?
Well,
In your view, Shaun, what would the correct procedure? Okay, interview the player. What is the chain of events?
I would send the investigator. The investigation set up at the FA isn't quite what it used to be, but you would send somebody to each club, interview everybody who was involved, and the ref and the assistant ref, what was said, disseminate the evidence, and then see where you go from there. That's what you have to do. They don't always do it like that way, but I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, basically explore every avenue you can. If that includes, like a lot of the newspapers have actually done, and a lot of people did on the night, and you'll find on social media, but actually get the best experts you have. There were close-up pictures of what Firmino said to Holgate. And, so get a lip reader in. Lip reading now
is... One of the papers has used a lip reader this morning, which we won't go into the detail, but according to that lip reader, in the images that we've seen, that Firmino doesn't appear to racially abuse it. But that doesn't mean that he didn't say something else aside from that hasn't been caught on cameras.
No, but it's clear what he says. I think everything was pretty much caught on camera, wasn't it? It was fairly close up, and I think, listen, if you get more than one in, get two or three of the best around.
They do disagree sometimes, lip readers.
Yes, they do, but I think if you're talking about specific allegations or specific words, then surely, you would have to, like what the FA do on all things, basically disciplinary-wise, in terms of, you have to have a unanimous decision. So if it means getting 3 lip readers in, and if every single one of them has to agree that a particular word was said, then so be it. They've got to. What they have to do is investigate it thoroughly. Obviously they will, I assume, interview or ask for Holgate's, specific comments, for Firmino's own, to see what he said. In this day, we have to make sure that it's investigated.
It does seem that Holgate is standing by, because the Mail on Sunday this morning and others say that the Holgate, accompanied by the Everton manager Sam Allardyce and the director of football Steve Walsh, went to see the referee, which was Bobby Madley, straight after the game. Madley reported it at the time, 41 minutes in. Madley did report it to the fourth official, which is the protocol, isn't it? So Holgate is standing by the It does appear that he is standing by the allegations.
Yeah, I mean, the procedures were accelerated post-Suarez within the FA. I know they are quite a clunky organisation and they do move slowly. But I think as an organisation, if they've been pointing out racism elsewhere, and I think, as a media and as organisation, and the English generally have called out the Russians for next summer, I don't think the FA can dawdle on this one. I think they've got to act. I completely concur with what the guys are saying. They need to get investigators. I love the idea that football closes down at the weekend. This is like, with the FA, it's like going back to Lancaster Gate days, where you couldn't actually call them at the weekend, because FA people at the weekend.
You can call the Premier League, no problem.
You can call the Premier League, absolutely. The Premier League won't act on this. So, the Football Association, I completely agree. Get an investigator up there. It is possible, even on the M6, to move on it on a weekend, and act quickly, because headline after headline, it's damaging.
What about the PFA getting involved? You like a bit of mediation, but in this case, I would agree that maybe they have to get involved and talk to. They're both members, I presume, and discuss it with... If you go back a long way, wasn't there an incident involving Steve Nicol many years ago, which went to the PFA, and they were investigating as well? I seem to have a picture of him standing outside the offices. It was a long time ago. And they got involved in it in a big way. They put in their people. I'm not sure if they do that nowadays, but it may be. You have to bring in everybody because it's involving two clubs in the same city, and it's quite high end, isn't it? This one, it needs investigating really thoroughly.
Andy, how do you foresee this affecting relations between the two clubs? Is it damaging?
Well, it doesn't help. You know, it doesn't help. I don't think it depends on how it plays out. You know, if one thing or the other is proven.
But this won't be, regardless, it won't be forgotten, will it? Between the two sets of supporters, it will not be forgotten that this allegation was made.
No, it won't be forgotten. The allegation.
It won't be a footnote. I don't see it as a footnote in history.
What, you see it as a sort of as a pivotal moment?
I do, yeah. I do.
I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure. I don't know. Listen, I wouldn't be able to gauge the feeling on Merseyside one way or the other at the moment. I don't particularly think. I think if something serious is proven, it may well do. Overall, you know, listen, the rivalry, the idea that it's some sort of fuzzy warmth between the two sets of fans, you know, is ancient history. That's long gone. I mean, that's absolutely long gone. So
when did it go?
Well, I mean, years and years. I mean, I couldn't say a possible time. Maybe. I mean, listen, for as long as I can remember.
It's quite civilised between the clubs, though, isn't it?
Oh yes, civilised between the clubs, I would say, and still is. You know, I mean, still is very civilised between the clubs. I mean, extremely civilised between the clubs.
Let's go back to sort of '86. Everton fans could sit in the Liverpool end, right, and vice versa.
Yes, probably.
And did.
Probably, and did.
Could
maybe.
you do
it's
that?
A sort of sepia tinted memory. Could you do that now? You probably could, yes. I mean,
without being removed by a steward or someone making a complaint, police.
I would have thought you'd be removed by a steward now if you were wearing opposite colours. I would have thought so. But that's sort of par for the course anyway. I don't think the rivalry now between Liverpool and Everton is any different from any other intercity rivalries. I wouldn't have thought. I don't get that impression when I'm back home there. So, will this alter things? I don't think it'll alter it dramatically. Will it alter relationships between the clubs? I think it's really good, the relation between the clubs. You know, it's been crystallised by you know, certain events, and I don't think that will alter dramatically. You know, in the end, you know, I think both their reactions have been to say, OK, listen, we will cooperate fully and we will respect, you know, an investigation into it, and that's all they can do. No one's coming out to defend either player. The clubs have handled it well. The clubs have handled it well. The managers, although Sam sort of said, you know, that Steve Walsh will deal with it, and he, I think, accompanied Holgate, didn't he, rather than Sam. And I just think that they've handled it well, and they realise the sensitivity of it. So it'll be an individual thing rather than a club thing. In terms, it'll be Mason Holgate and Firmino rather than some sort of Liverpool Everton schism.
Liverpool also learnt from the Suarez and how the fallout and how badly that was handled. Also, remember, Liverpool are going through this with Ryan Brewster as well. You know, the fantastic young player they've got, and you know, there is a need for not just the FA but UEFA and FIFA to examine the racist abuse that he's had. So yeah, but I mean,
in which case, Henry, they should also investigate this.
You don't think?
No,
Liverpool
in which case they should.
Absolutely, yeah. And you don't think Liverpool aren't looking at this behind the scenes as well? I'm sure they are. They're a conscientious club, and they will have learned from Suarez. But also but the FA need to move quickly on this.
OK, good stuff, guys. Shall we move on? Let's talk Arsene Wenger, banned from the touchline today for their game against Nottingham Forest in the FA Cup, banned for 2 more games beyond that as well. We'll talk about that next. Shaun, can I take you all the way back to Arsenal's draw at the Hawthorns?
Right.
Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
1-1 draw, was it? Arsenal went in front. Sanchez's deflected goal. Chambers handball penalty. West Brom equalise. Wenger goes into Mike Dean's referee's room, and that gives him a mouthful. 3-match touchline ban, which of course starts today. Is that the appropriate punishment? Bearing in mind, well, let's take into account that he's got a little bit of form. Anthony Taylor, the shove, the 4-match touchline ban earlier last year. Is this the appropriate punishment?
Well, first of all, I don't think anybody disagrees with Arsene about what he felt about the penalty, because it clearly wasn't. So you can understand why he gets annoyed. But he knows it's inappropriate to do what he's done. And if you've got form previously...
He's saying he's standing by it all.
Yes, but if you've got form previously, it's going to tot up his mind. However, it was expected he might get a stadium ban for the first time ever, and he didn't. Some people think, well, 3-match touchline ban, you can't be on the touchline, so therefore is there much difference between 3-match touchline ban and stadium ban? But he wouldn't have wanted a stadium ban at all. So in some ways, you might say they've let him off the hook because they may slightly understand that it wasn't a penalty. It wasn't
the stadium ban for Mourinho is because Mourinho refused to leave John Moss's referee's room at half-time in the West Ham game. But it is that is another. I think
you are allowed to go into the referee's room. You are allowed to knock on the door and go into the referee's room.
In that case,
to leave, it's wise.
In that case, the head of security had to remove Jose Mourinho from the referee's room.
But we've seen Arsene Wenger lose it a lot, and I'm sure he does use expletives from time to time. And when you've done 1,207 games, I think you're going to run into problems with authorities from time to time. And he is yet to have a stadium ban in 21 years. So, do we think overall he's a particularly bad bloke? Not really. I don't. I think he's entitled to lose his rag sometimes. Certainly a decision like that.
But look at the contrast there. If there had been Jose Mourinho, you know, without leaping to Jose's defence,
I don't think Arsene's ever stuck his finger in a coach's eye, and things like that.
He got a game for kicking a water bottle, didn't he?
Jose got
one game. He got sent off. He got sent off in the game.
Yes.
And then subsequently served a one-match.
Because the water bottle could have been a danger to someone, you know, in the vicinity. He was thirsty or something. But, I just do think there's a contrast there. In the language you're using there, do we think he's a bad bloke? No, he's entitled to lose his rag with managers now, with referees now and again.
Yeah, I take your point.
I mean, really, you know, he has been as guilty as anyone. You know, we've seen him have... Listen, we've seen him have a physical confrontation with Jose Mourinho at Stamford Bridge, you know, which was probably initiated by Wenger, would you say? I mean, probably. We've seen him the hands-on with Anthony Taylor, so you know this is.
And the Paul Taylor incident. If you go back a long time, the Paul Taylor
several
incident,
times,
but over 21 years. But where he's wrong, of course, is
this is what I was referring to in the show. That Jose thinks, well, why does Arsene get such great press? Why is there an element of sympathy for him barging into a referee's room?
I think the ban's probably fair. The touchline ban is probably fair enough. Do you think the touchline ban's fair enough?
I think he's gone off lightly. But I think when he went in to see the referee, or during this ban, if you could actually go and talk to Mike Riley of PGMO and actually talk about the declining refereeing standards. I completely agree with you in terms of how he expressed it and going into the referee's room. And, you know, you can't do that. The issue is, you know, the essential issue. He is right. The decline in refereeing in this country is alarming. You know, we touched on Bobby Madley. I completely agree with you. He should have brandished certainly a red card there. So he's absolutely got a point. It's how he's expressed it.
But you are entitled to say, I think, that refereeing standards have declined. I think you should be able to say that without any action. First of all, you should be able to express your opinions on referees. It's just where you cross the line. By and large, Wenger is quite careful about how he says it and tries not to cross the line. But sometimes, look, he crosses the line. And I take your point about Mourinho, exactly. You're quite right. He probably does get a more sympathetic view. But he has had 21 years in the game. You're going to have some spats somewhere along that 21 years in the English game. So overall, is his record terrible over 21 years?
No, probably not. Probably not any worse or any better than anyone else. You know, I think, but it does tend to get. I think it does tend to get overlooked a little bit when he's hypercritical of refs in comparison with someone like you know Jose Mourinho, who recently, for example, you know, praised sort of Craig Pawson. You know, and so what a great referee he was, and you know there's a book coming here, and you know there's a book coming here, and the book comes, you know, with one particular decision he got wrong in that game.
Where he lets himself down, Wenger, particularly, is when Bellerin on Hazard, and he says it's totally wrong decision, absolute disgrace, whatever. When we can see, looking at that there is certainly a case for a penalty, and that's when you think, come on, there is definitely a possibility that was a penalty at the very least.
And Wilshere as well. The simulation could have gone off.
Henry was loving in that press conference because Wenger said no one wants to talk about football anymore. Just talk about amateur officers. I do want to talk about some technology as well, though, which is being brought in tomorrow night, first time. This is VAR, video assistant referee. No?
No, he said not before
We've got
time.
Oh.
Go on.
Can we talk about it?
Yeah, go on.
Is that
No,
okay?
I mean, no,
Permission
not
granted?
before
Thank
time,
you.
not for all of it, please.
Thank you.
Go on.
Okay.
Well, it's only coming in
Henry?
for 4 issues, and clearly it needs to be done. Shaun, don't worry, it's not going to end all the controversy. You'll still have your back. You'll have your back page headlines to keep you happy, so you don't have to worry about the football. But look, it's ridiculous. So we're at a match. We've got a monitor there. We're sort of streaming things. We've got social media. We've got Vine. You know, we can check on everything,
yes.
and everyone can look at it apart from the person who's got to make the decision. It is crazy. So, look, there will be substantial teething problems, as we've seen in Europe. It may take sort of 2 or 3 years, but, I mean, all the indications is that I think Martin Ziegler carried a piece in the Times saying that it may well be introduced for next season.
And for the World Cup.
And for the World Cup. So, look, it's here to say.
Do you
and 21st century, we need the technology.
OK, I agree with that. My only issue with it is, OK, so it's being used for one game in the FA Cup third round,
I agree with
Brighton
that.
Palace.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Then it won't be
League
used
Cup.
for Man City, Bristol City, because they haven't got the technology in place with all the television cameras that are required to make the decisions. So it won't be used for the second leg down at Bristol City. But, we will use it for Chelsea against Arsenal on Wednesday.
Yeah.
There's no consistency in the
Well, there's no
competitions, which,
Yeah.
to my mind, in terms of the credibility of the league, damages it.
Yeah, but is it that...
Credibility of the competition.
For the competition, but it's still in the experimental stage. You know, they've agreed to do this.
Well, why don't they do
and the
it in pre-season?
competition...
OK, why don't they do it in pre-season friendlies? Right, experiment.
They have
VAR
done in pre-season friendlies. Yeah, but I think in terms of the league, the domestic league, it will come in en bloc, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, and I think both competitions... Listen, both competitions also, you know, need all the lift they can get, and this gives an extra element of interest to Palace versus Brighton tomorrow, doesn't it? You know, no doubt about that. And so I think
Don't say that to Palace or Brighton fans. They don't need any extra.
They don't need no, but to the rest of us, but who were slightly mystified by but it will give that extra bit of interest. So, but just going quickly back to what Henry says, I know it's a broad subject about Henry says the decline in refereeing standards. I'd prefer to look at the vast improvements in cheating standards. Yeah. That's what it is. It's the vast improvements in players hoodwinking, conning, cheating referees at every conceivable opportunity.
Is Wilfred Zaha?
Well, that's why we need this.
Is Zaha a diver?
Yes. Listen, and he is not alone. I see so many strikers whose first instinct now, and you never thought you'd say this about a striker, whose first instinct when they get clear into the box is to go down. I'll tell you when it happened. It happened Newcastle versus Manchester City, when Dwight Gale went through, and was it Danilo coming behind him?
Yeah.
And his instinct, he was through, but his instinct was to go down. Too many strikers' instincts is to go down rather than to...
the referee caught that.
And why I was saying that is that if... I'm a little bit sceptical about VAR, but if that in some way tackles this plague of incessant conning of referees, then I think it's a good thing.
Have you got your phone with you? Is it on you now?
No.
You'll have a phone call from Steve Parish on that, I think, by the time you get off there today. He's not gonna be very
I
happy.
think what I'm concerned about is when it says it's for penalty decisions. And we all know that you're going to start going, right, OK, so that's a penalty, but hang on, what about that foul that happened 2 seconds before just outside the box? And then you say, yeah, but 2 seconds earlier or 5 seconds earlier, that happened. And how far we're going to go back and think, well, we should have stopped the game there. That, I think, is where you're going to get the serious controversy, because there will be so many arguments about what happened, or maybe it wasn't even a throw-in leading up to the cross that led to the penalty. That's going to cause mayhem, and I don't think that has been properly ironed out.
Well, that's why the trialling is so important. But the other issue there is that who are going to be the extra officials coming in? Because if the big debate is we haven't got enough good referees.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. OK. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week at 9:30. Bye for now.